So, welcome everybody. Tonight we're discussing critical questions on the Dutch research project Decolonization, Violence and War in Indonesia 1945-1950. And we're using the open letter as a starting point. You all have it, I guess, and we're using it as a draft, so the discussion that we're having tonight, we're also going to use it to improve the letter. So we understand that this is a broad, complex topic with many disagreements. And I want to ask you if we can all agree on one thing. And that is, colonialism is a human rights violation, therefore it is illegitimate. Can we all agree on this? Yes. Is there somebody who can agree with this? Okay, cool. So, take a look at the program. There's two parts. First, there's presentations. We're going to listen to the organizers, and there's going to be a panel. And later on, we're going to have a discussion with each other. But before we're going to start, I'm going to introduce myself. And I'm going to read it a little bit. But I would like to thank everybody who worked on making this event possible and everybody who is participating tonight. I will be honest with you, I'm not an expert on this, I'm just here to moderate. But since I'm a product of Dutch colonialism in the what is the word again? Archipelago, now known as Indonesia, I would like to share some personal experiences with you. When I grew up as a young boy in a small town about 1 hour northeast from Amsterdam, I didn't know I was a product of colonialism. The only thing I knew was that everybody looked different than my brother, my dad, and me. Everybody around us was white, and everyone was wondering where we came from. When I was 18, I started interviewing my great uncle. He was born in the archipelago, in his time known as the Dutch Indies, and he grew up there. He was the last of his generation, and I wanted to find out where I came from, and also write down his words for the next generations. So, although I have a lot of respect for my great uncle, he couldn't really tell me where I came from. He could just tell me how he and our family lived as colonizers in the colonized archipelago. Also, to be honest, he didn't really seem to understand why colonialism is bad. Excuse me. So he romanticized his time in the systematically racist Dutch East Indies, and he never really came any further than acknowledging that both sides did terrible things. So today, I stand here with the feeling that I'm the result of systematical, physical, and economical rape of a country and their women. I realize, though, that I'm privileged in so many ways. For example, because Jan Pieterszoon Koen didn't massacre my family and me. I just live in a country where this genocidal maniac is still being honored as some kind of hero. My dad's family was privileged because they had European blood, and thus were higher up in the racist hierarchy that was created by the Dutch in the archipelago. My ancestors with mixed indigenous and European blood chose the side of the oppressor. Today, I speak up and say, I would have done it differently. All forms of resistance against the Dutch colonizer were legitimate, and I would have actively taken part in the resistance against the colonizer, like the struggle today against neocolonialism, racism, and capitalism. So I couldn't trust on my family or friends with the same roots to teach me more about where I came from. Today, I'm still struggling to find out what my real roots are. So for me, the decolonization of science is a personal matter. Therefore, I would like to emphasize my respect to all of you who are here and participating in the movement of decolonization, because you are helping me to find out where I came from and helping me to find out who I am. Thank you. I'm still kind of tense, but it's going good. So let's see, what's next? think we're going to speak with the organizers. And we're going to start with Ethan Mark. He's the chair of the Leiden University MA program in Asian Studies. And he will explain what motivated him to facilitate this event. And as an American historian living in the Netherlands, he will give some background information about the specific way the Dutch are dealing with their colonial history. Mark.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming out on a relatively pleasant October evening. I'm Ethan Mark. I teach modern Japanese and Asian history in the Japanese and Asian Studies programs here at Leiden. And I'm also the chair of the MA program in Asian Studies. I'm honored to welcome you all here to this gathering, in which we meet to have a critical consideration of the 1945-50 project on the Indonesian Independence War. What brings me here? Well, personally and professionally, I've had a long experience of interaction with Indonesia. For pretty much all of my career as a scholar, the primary focus of my research has been the Japanese occupation of Indonesia during World War II, viewed transnationally. And by that I mean particularly from a Japanese and Indonesian perspective. I also have a family connection to Indonesia through my wife, whose father fought against the Dutch in the Revolution and who came to the Netherlands afterwards to study engineering at Delft University on a fellowship he always made sure that we realized came from the newly independent Indonesian government. As it turned out, somewhere around 1953, the Netherlands was also where my father-in-law met my mother-in-law. So as an American, this family connection is what brought me to the Netherlands about 20 years ago. And these were my motivations for learning the Indonesian language and combining it with my study of Japan's history. I was already busy with Japanese for a while before that, with that of Indonesia. When I first heard about Marjolein van Pagee's Historie Bersama initiative, I was very excited and impressed. This project to make Dutch voices heard in Indonesia, and above all, to make Indonesian voices heard in the Netherlands, is to my knowledge quite novel and truly a breath of fresh air, and I'm eager to encourage and support its activities. I have been studying colonial history and its legacies for a long time, but as a foreigner in the Netherlands, it has taken me a long time to understand the situation, or at least to the best that I can, understand the situation of how colonial history is viewed and dealt with here, and to get a sense of the different and diverse groups in Dutch society that are interested and invested in this history. To put it simply, it seems to me that at least as much as in many other post-colonial societies, colonial history and colonial ways of thinking are still very much present in Dutch culture and daily life. Indeed, omnipresent. But more than in most post-colonial societies, that presence is something that most Dutch people are little conscious of. They learn little about it in school, and they generally accept the post-war understanding of the Netherlands as a small, peaceful country in the northwest of Europe that stands for many positive European values, such as democracy, freedom of speech and thinking, dedication to science and progress, and an inquisitive and enterprising spirit. Now we can all go home. The history of the Netherlands as an empire, if it is included in this self-image at all, is that of something that ended long ago. It might have included some bad things, but also some good things, and in any case, would seem to have little connection to the way things are now. I could go on for a long time about this, and I'm sure many of us here will be eager to do so this evening. There are many facets to this. But what strikes me in particular about the Netherlands today, when compared to other post-colonial societies, is the virtual absence of the voices of the former colonized, the virtual lack of representation or understanding of Indonesian views, Indonesian thinking, or Indonesian history. This is hardly to say that few people in the Netherlands have an Indonesia connection. This is in fact another very striking and distinctive aspect of the Netherlands. So many people, so many families do have a historical connection, but not to Indonesia. For the vast majority of them, at least, the connection is to a political and social entity that disappeared in 1949. And by that I mean the colonial Netherlands Indies. In the wake of the demise of that entity, hundreds of thousands of tropical Dutch citizens, or Indies Nederlanders, made their way back to the Netherlands. For most of them, this was not a move made by choice, but rather compelled by circumstances. Both in terms of how they left Indonesia and the sort of welcome that they received in the Netherlands when they arrived here, these circumstances were often not very positive, to say the least. For many of them, theirs is a story with its own tragedies and suffering, made worse by what many of them feel is a lack of recognition of this suffering and of their equal rights and status as citizens of the Netherlands and of its former empire. Now, this is another subject that many of those present surely know a lot more about and could surely talk a lot more about than me. But in direct connection with the research project on 1945 to 50, what I rather want to briefly focus on here is this problem of Indonesian representation in Dutch society, or rather the lack thereof. In many parts of the post-colonial world, including the former colonial mother countries, otherwise known as metropoles, over the decades since former colonialism ended, the voices and experiences of the former colonized have made their way into politics, into public discourse, and among other things, into scholarship. This combination of a political movement and a trend in scholarship, which has various names, including post-colonialism and decolonization, has brought about great changes in both scholarly and general consciousness regarding what colonialism was and what colonialism is. Three of the essential things that post-colonial studies emphasize are, firstly, the centrality and tenaciousness of colonialism as a cultural phenomenon then and now. The awareness that modern colonialism consisted of much more than a set of official policies and practices, but rather more profoundly, colonialism built and sustained itself through structures of thinking, of language, and of knowledge that function to make its domination natural. Developed, reproduced, and reinforced over a century and a half, beginning around the early 19th century, modern colonial thinking and discourses created a deep and vast repertoire of ways of categorizing, referring to, and dealing with the colonized that all shared one thing in common. They consistently placed the colonizer in a position of superiority over the colonized. These frames of thinking, which one scholar some 40 years ago famously identified as Orientalism, became basic building blocks of the way we all think today. One specific example of this, also essential to understanding colonialism in the Netherlands and its legacies, is race thinking and racism. A second central issue highlighted in post-colonial movements and scholarship is the problem of representation. The question of who is to represent and speak for the colonized, the former colonized, and their experiences. For the period of colonialism itself, the answer to this question was clear enough: the colonizer. After formal colonialism ended, officially speaking at least, the former colonized could speak for themselves. But if we look at who was writing the histories of their experiences, how these histories were written, and which histories retained the most global authority and influence, we must acknowledge that long after colonialism ended, the balance of power over the study of history of the colonized remained in the hands, and therefore also in the minds, of the former colonizers. A third and related central issue raised in post-colonial scholarship in particular is the problem of the archive, the question of sources. When writing histories of colonized societies and peoples, what sorts of sources are available, and how should we use them? Here again, the hegemony of the colonizer naturally resulted in a profound overrepresentation of their views, narratives, and interpretations in the colonial archives. Condemned to a low social status, low levels of education, and low amounts of opportunity to write things down, even if they could, the great majority of the natives left few written records, and fewer still in official settings. Yet for conventional historians, this was long seen, those sorts of sources were long seen as the only sort of documentation that was considered reliable. So an essential question of post-colonial studies has therefore been how to creatively use the sources available to address this problem of the overrepresentation of the colonizer and his standpoints, and I use that gender on purpose. Given the stakes involved, this is not only a scholarly question, but inevitably also a political and even a moral one. While scholarship that puts a priority on such issues has certainly made inroads in some quarters in the Netherlands, it is remarkable to me how much resistance to it still remains. Indeed, in the conclusion to his recent book, Post-Colonial Netherlands, Geert Oostindie, a prominent scholar who also happens to figure very prominently in the project that we're discussing here, rightly observes that in the Netherlands, there is no widespread tradition of reflecting on the colonial past, even less so an explicitly post-colonial paradigm. Recent studies have remarked upon the fact that even once a debate on colonialism and its legacies had developed, this school, that is post-colonial studies, found few supporters in the Netherlands. Oostindie, however, finds this remarkably untroubling. The question is not only whether this observation is correct and what the explanation might be, he writes, but if so, whether much has been missed. The Netherlands may indeed be different from many other post-colonial societies in this regard, but the implication here is that this is a good thing, a reflection of the continued dedication of Dutch scholars and Dutch society to a rational, critical, and balanced view of their own history, despite whatever subjective and political biases might plague scholarship in other places. In the same passage, indeed, the same author draws precisely such a contrast with Indonesian scholarship. Indonesian historiography after World War II, he writes, was, quote, marked by a mixture of antagonism towards colonialism and a downplaying of the significance of the Netherlands in the history of the archipelago, but also by scant interest in theoretical reflection and debate. Rather curious words coming from a scholar who reads no Indonesian. But who needs the voices of the former colonized when Western scholars are already the most advanced in the world? In fact, the same scholar has also written that not just the Netherlands, but the West, more generally, has a special talent for coming to terms with its own colonial history. In this case, in comparison with the former empires to the east. He writes, what emerges is that Europe and the United States are far more open to these issues than the former colonial powers of Japan and Russia, he writes. Evidently, continuing in his words, evidently something like a Western norm for historical accountability emerged after the Second World War. Such statements reveal assumptions about Western superiority towards the rest of the world, not only in areas such as scholarship, but indeed in moral, political, and civilizational terms. The same sorts of assumptions that were once central to colonial thinking, and remain so today. With reference to the experience of the Netherlands, I also find them remarkable with specific reference to Japan as a negative counterexample. The conventional view of post-war Japan, particularly in the West, is indeed as a nation that has had particular difficulty coming to terms with its colonial and wartime past, and there is certainly something to be said for that. Nevertheless, it is also clear that the international playing field for such pressure to come to terms is heavily skewed in favor of the powerful. Under pressure for decades from its former Western enemies, and more recently from increasingly powerful Asian neighbors, in relative imperial terms at least, the Japanese state has in fact gone much further than the Netherlands in supporting critical investigations into its own colonial and wartime past, if not necessarily eagerly embracing all of the resulting findings, and that's putting it mildly. These include historical research projects combining Chinese, Korean, and Japanese scholars and institutions in equal measure, as well as generous grants to scholars and scholarly institutions in countries whose citizens suffered under Japanese rule, including the Netherlands. This has happened in the face of pressure from nationalist interest groups within Japan, such as former army veterans and their families, who have long been an important constituent of Japan's leading conservative party, the LDP. Now, the nature of the political decision-making process of this project that we're talking about tonight, and the fact that the VVD party, in particular, only agreed to approve funding for the project when certain conditions deemed acceptable to Dutch veterans and their families were met, shows that Japan is hardly alone in having to contend with such powerful veterans' lobbies. While not necessarily very influential in wider society, Japanese scholars themselves have meanwhile produced an impressive body of scholarship profoundly and unflinchingly critical of past crimes committed in the name of the Japanese imperial state. As a Japan scholar in the Netherlands, I myself was one of several local scholars who enjoyed a general Japanese government-funded grant from the Netherlands Institute of War Documentation and Genocide Studies, the NIOD, to pursue precisely such a project in the early 2000s, with absolutely no strings attached. The result was my production of the English translation of Yoshimi Yoshiaki's book, Grassroots Fascism, the War Experience of the Japanese People. Grassroots fascism is a classic example of critical Japanese scholarship on World War II, written by a prominent progressive scholar who is vilified on the Japanese right, above all for his pioneering and devastatingly critical work and research on the comfort women. So the central question that arises for me here is not, as Kerr Toastindi puts it, whether much has been missed in the Netherlands' failure to absorb or reflect upon the lessons of recent global developments in scholarship on the colonial past and its legacies. It is rather the question, what is specific about the Netherlands that makes it possible for him to ask such a question, and to receive relatively little in the way of a critical response to it? First and foremost, I think the answer to this must be found in the relative lack, again, of representation and influence of the voices of the former colonized in today's Netherlands compared with those in many other post-colonial societies. Sociologically, as shown, for example, in the extraordinary work of Lizzie van Leeuwen, I think the reason for this is straightforward. While there are many Indisch Nederlanders, there are very few Indonesians in the Netherlands, and fewer still bold enough to make their critical voices heard. Conversely, in Indonesia itself, there are few people left who still speak or read Dutch, and fewer still who take an active, critical interest in what is said and done in the Netherlands with regard to their country. To the naive observer, therefore, Indonesia might appear to have moved on. But the wounds of the past are still present. And in any case, a lack of general Indonesian concern with what we say and do in the Netherlands is no excuse for avoiding the lessons of post-colonial studies in our own work. Most importantly, because the greatest lesson of some 40 years of post-colonial studies around the world is that studying colonial history is not only about studying them, it is about studying us. The question of the degree and nature of Indonesian participation and representation in a research project such as this one, and the degree to which the scholars involved take account of the experiences and the standpoints of the colonized, are not simply questions for Indonesians. More fundamentally, they are questions for the Netherlands. That is why I strongly support this initiative, and I hope that tonight's proceedings will give us a rare opportunity to share constructive, critical thoughts on these issues. Thank you.
Okay, let me say a few words. I didn't plan to talk very long, but I think I owe you some maybe explanations of why Historie Bersama wanted to organize an event like this. Maybe I also don't know how much or how closely you are following the developments around this project, but when it was 14 September, there was a presentation, the launching of the new government project, and that was the reason that I think there were questions were raised, not only by me but many others, and I started to think, okay, there should be maybe an evening, a meeting that we can discuss it. So in the second part, I'm really curious to your opinion and what you all think, or if you can, if you have questions too, or maybe you have questions about the criticism, it's also possible. Let's just discuss it openly. I think that's the time now. Furthermore, I want to explain a little bit about the next panel discussion is also with Jeffry Pondaag, who was painfully missing during the kick-off event. And he's here now, so I'm very happy he's here, and he wants to share a little bit about what motivated him all those years, because maybe many know him from the court cases against the Dutch state since launched since 2008 and still going. He has been active, or he has been interested in this particular history for a long time, and yeah, he will share us. Secondly, also, well, we call her Francisca, Pattipilohy. She is here, and she also, together, they came up with the idea to write an open letter. And it was, I think, before the 14th, you already have the concept letter with your questions, and I thought, I mean, the letter as it is now, the concept text that you all received has been changed, and with a handful of people we have been working on that. Again, it's a concept, and we would like to hear if you can, your opinion about that, but that's the background of the letter. So it's two people who said we want to formulate what we think, the questions that really matter and that they are missing right now in the project. Secondly, I want to say only for the focus of the discussion, I prefer to focus on the Dutch case. It's already clear from the title, but this is, from my experience at least, there are so many things to discuss when you talk about colonialism and the after effects and the knowledge and well, so many things, and it easily ends up off topic or a little bit confusing. So I think in the future maybe we can do that soon. We can organize a similar talk or meeting and discuss how Indonesia particularly is dealing with the colonial past, or how it is popping up or not, or how it is ignored, or how it is written, stuff like that. But for this evening, we are talking about the Dutch case and how this research project has been set up. So just a few notes to explain the idea behind it.
Yeah, I would like to invite members of the panel to come sit with us.
Mag ik 1 minuut?
Yeah.
I thought Jeffrey was here as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got 4 members in the panel, and Marjolein is going to interview them. So we've got Jeffry Pondaag. He was here just a minute ago, but he's probably coming back in a minute as well. He's the chairman of the Dutch Debt of Honor Committee, and he successfully launched court cases against the Dutch state. And he was not invited to speak at the kickoff event of the project we were discussing tonight. And Francisca is also here. Francisca Pattipilohy, 91 years old. She was born and lived in
Para hadirin, selamat malam. Terima kasih atas kedatangan Anda di sini. Jij. Jij wil ik even hebben, jij. Jauh-jauh dari Jakarta, mampir dulu di Jogja.
I would like to propose you moderate next time.
Coba Yai. Yai kasih lihat semua itu apa itu. Laat eens even zien wat dat is. Want daar moet het beginnen. De geschiedenis moet daar beginnen. Als het KITLV, het Koninklijke Instituut, of liever gezegd het Koloniale Instituut, zeg maar het onderzoek we gaan doen, moeten ze daar beginnen. En als ze dat niet weten, dan kunnen ze liever bij stoppen. Ik dank u wel.
So if the institutes that are working on the project don't know this, don't understand this, they should stop right now. That's what we're saying. Okay. Cool. So okay, I'll continue. Jeffrey, welcome.
Thank you.
So Francisca Pattipilohy, 91 years old. She was born and lived in colonial times during the war. She studied Indies colonial law in Leiden, and this opened her eyes. And out of protest against the Dutch second military action, she quit her study and returned to Indonesia. And in 1965, she fled Indonesia and lived in the Netherlands afterwards. And she initiated to write the open letter together with Jeffrey. And then there's Indonesian journalist Aboeprijadi Santoso, lives in the Netherlands. He wrote a critical opinion piece on the project, on the kickoff of the project, and it was rejected by Dutch newspapers and finally published in Jakarta Post. And Yvonne Rieger-Rompas, an independent researcher living in Germany, and helping the chairman of the Dutch Debt of Honor Committee with research in Indonesia. So please give a big applause for that.
Let me see if it works. Yes, it works. Maybe let's start with the story of Jeffrey. As I already said, everybody knows, or I think most of you knows about the court cases, but maybe what I heard is that you came to the Netherlands in 1969, which is a very ironic year in terms of the history. Can you maybe even just speak in Dutch if you or in
Ik ken helaas niet goed in het Engels geworden, maar ik doe het wel in het Nederlands.
I will translate sometimes, you know.
Nou, zoals Marjolein al zegt, ik was 16 toen ik hier kwam. 19 juli 1969. Ik val met de neus in de boter, zeggen ze dan. En toen speelde de zaak de excessennota en Joop Witting is op de televisie. Toen krijg ik al van mijn familie om mijn oren. De Indonesiërs terroristen zijn extremisten en rampokkers en dat Sukarno, die net was, een collaborateur is. Dus ik met mijn 16-jarige oud geleerd in Indonesië hoe onze geschiedenis is, dan valt me wel mijn bek helemaal open.
So yeah, I'm going to try to translate. So Jeffrey was 16 when he came to the Netherlands. In the time of the excessennota, I wouldn't know how to translate that. Yeah. And okay, it's not a good idea to try to translate, make your nose in the boter vallen. No, please go on. Yeah.
Behalve dat ik dus bij de familie hier behoorlijke woordenwisseling heb gehad, ondanks dat ik nog 16 jaar was, heb ik ook natuurlijk met mijn leeftijdgenoten de ouders ervan. Dus al die jaren boks ik gewoon met die gevoelens, wat ik denk dat Nederland gewoon geschiet zit te vervalsen, en de mensen gewoon niet goed informeren.
So we had a lot of discussions with his friends and his families, and basically he found out that the history just wasn't written in the right way.
Sterker nog, ik ben dus met een boek waar mijn dochter mee thuis kwam, ben ik naar die leraar gegaan. Ik zeg tegen de leraar, ik gooi nog dat boek op tafel bij hem. Ik zeg, als je dit boek aan mijn kind gaat leren, dan haal ik het kind eruit. En het interesseert me niet of de leerlingambtenaar bij mij komt. Zij gaat de zaal uit. Zij gaat de klas uit.
So once he found out the history book that his daughter got in school was just completely ridiculous, and he went to the school, he threw the book at the teacher, and he told the teacher that if his daughter had to read this, she wouldn't have to or couldn't even go to school from him, even if the government would come after him.
Wat ik wel eigenlijk wil benadrukken, dames en heren, waar haalt Nederland het recht om een land die 18.000 kilometer ver ligt als Nederland bezit te beschouwen?
He would like to emphasize the question, where does the Netherlands get the right from to colonialize a country 8,000 kilometers away?
En daar hebben we een antwoord gekregen. Zelfs Oost-Indië kan mij niet dat antwoord geven. Oké, en op een gegeven moment heb ik dus in mijn eigen gewoon brieven geschreven naar de minister van Onderwijs, lobbyen met de Tweede Kamer. Ik word iedere keer tegen de muur aan.
Can I ask you, when did you start with sending the letters? I mean, if you were first 16, when did it start? Did you set?
Ik dacht, dus op in de jaren 80 ben ik daarmee begonnen. En ik heb ook in de jaren 80 op een gegeven moment gezegd tegen mijzelf, omdat als het 4 of 5 mei de herdenking was, dat het een minuut of 2 minuten stilte was, dat ze dus ja, gaat herdenken. Op een gegeven moment heb ik dat ook gedaan, want ik weet ook zeker dat ik toen op de Afsluitdijk een auto aan de kant zette. Maar op een gegeven moment heb ik dus gezegd in 1980 van dat doe ik niet meer. Want wat Nederland nu doet is gewoon geschiedvervalsing. Hoezo herdenken? Hoezo vrijheid?
Do you find it hypocrite when on one hand people are remembered from the Second World War, but they don't remember almost nothing about what happened in Indonesia?
Ja, en dat ben ik tot de dag vandaag nog hoor. Het is geluk, de Nederlandse regering en ook de Nederlandse historici en ook onderwijs. Het is geluk om hun volk gewoon op de verkeerde been te zetten. Maar wij zijn ook mensen van vlees en bloed. Hè? Ik bedoel, wat is het verschil tussen mij, vader, en de Indische mensen die hier zijn? Wat is daar het verschil in? Ze zijn allemaal daar geboren. Het enige verschil is dat ze hebben daar het kolonialisme in stand gehouden. En dat geldt ook voor de zogenaamde, de militairen. Zonder die mensen is Nederland daar helemaal niks. Want die mensen die weten de weg om het eigen volk te vermoorden.
Yes, so in the 80s, Jeffrey started writing letters to the government about what he thought was wrong about the way they wrote history, and he also stopped commemorating the death. It's what the Netherlands does on the 4th of May, but we don't commemorate the deaths of Indonesian people, but we do commemorate the deaths of the soldiers who were killing innocent people there. Maybe you can translate a little? Okay, just go on.
Thinking about the next question, but
That's the next question.
yeah, maybe I want to know more why you take the effort, and so many people don't take the effort to make this form. So why do you do that?
No,
do you want to change it? Do you think you can change it by expressing it?
Ja. Kijk, Nederland is bekend aan een rechtsstaat. Ze hebben hier in het internationaal tribunaal in Den Haag. En ik heb eigenlijk Nederland hoog geschat. Maar dus niet. Als je het hebt over wat wij meegemaakt hebben hè, in Indonesië, dat wil je niet geloven. Rechtvaardigheid is voor mij heel belangrijk. En die rechtvaardigheid zie ik ook niet terug. Ook niet op die 14e september met die kick-off. Ja, dat een voorzitter van de veteranen kan zeggen over, hoe noem je dat? Dat je het woord, ja, nee, het een term gebruikt. Nee, dat het woord in ieder geval oorlogsmisdaad veranderd moet worden. Dus de terminologie moet veranderen. De terminologie moet veranderen. Dus je moet niet oorlogsmisdaad woord gebruiken. Hoe moet ik tegen een weduwe vertellen die heeft gesproken? Dat haar man van 2 meter afstand met een pistool op een kop is geschoten. Dat je dat niet een oorlogsmisdaad kunt noemen? Hoe moet ik aan die kinderen vertellen? Waar hun vaders werden geroepen om in een pleintje te staan en hun namen worden geroepen en 1 voor 1 wordt doodgeschoten. Moet je dat geen oorlogsmisdaad noemen? Ik doe Nederland, luister eens goed. 47 was Nederland nog plat. Rotterdam was nog plat. Ze weten wat dat is. Ze hebben mij zelf meegemaakt hoe de Duitsers hier bezig zijn geweest. Zelf meegemaakt hoe de Japanners tegen hen zijn geweest. Ze waren zelf bezetters voordat het gebeurd is. Hoezo nuance? Ik heb nog één. De NIMH die heeft in 2016 een namenlijst gepubliceerd. 350 namen. Er staat allemaal in. Hoe ze geëxecuteerd zijn, Waar en door wie? En dan schrijf ik een brief aan de staat met een handreiking om dit te onderzoeken. Wat krijg ik voor een antwoord? We wachten tot het 4 jaar af worden met die 4 jaar onderzoek. Hoezo nuance? Waar blijft die intellectuelen van Nederland? Waar blijven ze? Die zogenaamd alles goed weten. Met hun internationaal tribunaal. Wij zijn gewoon van vlees en bloed. Wij willen vrij. En waar haalt Nederland het recht nogmaals om een land die 18.000 kilometer ver ligt als Nederland bezit te beschouwen?
Yeah, sorry for not translating correctly, but I think Jeffrey is a hero actually. So I'm listening very closely to him. But he's asking himself, where is the rule of law in the Netherlands, which we say we have, and he's wondering where is the justice in this country, which we think there is. And he's very surprised by a veteran at the kickoff event who was asking if we could use another term than war crime for what happened in this time. And he is wondering, how can I explain this to the daughter of the father who got killed point blank? How can I explain it to her husband? And he also emphasizes that the Netherlands was occupied itself before they went to Indonesia. And also he is wondering, where are the real intellectuals here in this country?
Can we go back to this again? Maybe you first. I think not many people know Yvonne, but she actually plays a very important role in the whole, if you talk about the court cases at least. And because to launch a court case, you need to have evidence, right? And Yvonne often travels to Indonesia to talk to the widows, to talk to people who experience something, and then Jeffry takes the information. So, can you explain maybe how you, or do you remember when you got in touch for the first time with Jeffry and Pagee? Can you tell about that?
Yeah, the first contact I had with Pagee, that one member of Pagee asked me to manage their homepage.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I started. And then one time I was in Indonesia for vacation. Then Jeff asked me to make research. And then another person from Netherlands organization asked me if I know more victims' family in another place in Indonesia. So I start from that time to do my research.
Yeah, I think I never saw you here in the Netherlands, but always I met you on the way in Indonesia, right? So how do you when you meet people, how do you work? Do you film it, or how do you bring the evidence back to? Can you tell a little bit?
Yeah, I asked the people around the village or in the city, make appointment to meet with somebody, some historici from one place, and then they introduced me to one person who was a victim's family, and from this one victim family, they introduced me to another.
Yeah, so it goes like that.
And they gave me the evidence.
Yeah. For this tonight, we are not discussing so much yes, I think the court cases are very much, they play a role in the whole debate in the Netherlands.
I think my sister. the base.
Yeah.
That's why the Netherlands wanted to do this decolonization research.
You think because of the court cases, eventually there is more attention for this topic,
Yeah.
and the result is
Yeah.
a new investigation, large-scale
Because
investigation.
there is some investigation long time ago. But why after 70 years they want to start it again? Yeah.
Yeah, you think it's
Because
no
that's
coincidence?
not enough from last time?
Yeah. So what did you, because maybe, well, what do you think of this whole research plan? Did you read it, or you just only do the research and you don't follow the whole discussion in the Netherlands, or do you follow it sometimes?
Not really, but I've got information from there. Yeah, because if I need evidence, then I read also archive from Netherlands. Yeah, in Indonesian it's not so very archive. So I thought, they want to learn their archive, or they want to learn what has happened in Indonesia from the archive or from the people.
But do you think it's important that the Netherlands, this research is going to happen because still so much unclear, or do you think you should already know, and why now? Do you think it's good or not? Maybe not
One
good.
side is good. Yeah, maybe so they understand who they are or who they were. Sometimes it's not good because there are so many archives. Really true archive. I mean, asleep, or they just make a report like this that this happened, but in the real it does not happen.
You think you don't trust that everything is written in the archive? Maybe it's not true, or maybe
It's not
it's
true.
too much trusted, the written statements.
I read like in Soldaten in Indonesia from Ostindie. Yeah, that sometimes they said they want to take go somewhere, and then they shot from the backside, just like look like that they run away, and then they have to shot. But it was not like that.
And how for you as an Indonesian, well, you mostly live in Germany, but you often in Indonesia, you hear so many sad stories. If you talk to all these old people or veterans, widows, children of those who suffered, what does that do to you? Will you, do you sometimes think, maybe it's enough, it makes me so sad, or what does it do to you?
If I hear 3 stories a day from different person, then I feel, it's so many. I want to close my ear. Yeah. And if I see tears, I better see another place. Yeah. Yeah, because they lost father or they lost husband, and how woman has to take care of children, the grown up. And sometimes it's crazy. Crazy time to hear the story directly from the person. It's different again as I read the archive to make perbandingan. Yeah.
Oh, to compare.
Yeah.
Sometimes you use the written report to compare the stories that you hear.
Yeah. How could the people do that?
Yeah. Okay, that's a tough one. Yeah. sorry, there was, I didn't know I had to show it on the screen, but there is a map or something, and
Ja,
then
een man.
all the places that you visited. But I didn't understand, I have to show it here, so we will post it on Facebook later. Maybe after to the map. Yes. Pattipilohy, or Aboeprijadi Santoso. Yeah, let's talk about this article in Jakarta Post, that it was published in Jakarta Post, but yeah, maybe can you explain a little bit for those who didn't read it, what was the topic? What was it about?
Well, actually I'm planning to what it is to skip it, assuming that everybody has read it. The thing is, I'm trying to adapt the original text in Indonesian and also in Dutch later for the Indonesian consumption. So that's the question we put there was really for the Indonesian public. There are many things which I cannot put all in the piece. Look, in 1987, one of my first, I was a journalist with Radio Netherlands Worldwide, with Omroep, and one of the first things I did for the coverage was interviewing or covering the very well-known conflict with De Jong in the 2 years. Everybody knows it. That's really a national topic at the time in Holland. When 87.
Oh,
87, when Professor De Jong came with the book on the Netherlands during the World War. And then you have the resistance from among the veterans.
because he used the word, what was it?
Because he used the word war crime. And as far as I know, that was the first time that an academic researcher has to concede and then agreeing with that series. I made an interview with De Jong. And that's nothing to do. We can also read it in the book itself. But the one when I met Jesus himself, he didn't talk about the war. He didn't talk about the violence. What he said, emphasizing is, look, Pak Santoso, you should remember, De Jong is a socialist. I'm trying to get what is it? What is the objection of SVUs and the veterans about war crime? What kind of violence was there? Nobody. That's it.
You asked about it.
Yeah, sure.
And then they said,
No. And these things come again and very recently when Dutch military officer, former veterans, former soldiers came to Indonesia and was welcomed by former enemies and then
1995?
yes, throughout the 1990s. And there's nothing about this violence, etc. In other words, their minds was playing with different categories. And then in 1997, I made the radio documentary on Java, West Java, Central Java, East Java, and Bali. I met about 22 former freedom fighters. Then in all this, if I connect with this, there's no word about policy axis. Nothing in their categories, in their culture, nothing in their mind. Really, so that word for the first time was also for me, I heard here. And then the Siap, let alone about the Siap. In other words, they have very different categories of understanding the history.
So what do you, can you, I mean, I know you were joining during the 14th September, or you were at least you were in the audience, and that is where you wrote the article about. Do you think? I'm curious. Do you, because you talk about decolonizing the research and the history, but do you think that Dutch should do this research, or do you think it will not work anyway, or something like that? Do you? What is your opinion about the research itself?
Okay, let's be fair. I mean, you cannot judge. It has not even begun, the research. We cannot condemn before even it's begun. But there are things we have to put forward. Questions about, well, like what I mentioned, there's a positional action. There's nothing in that, no such categories in Indonesian minds, I mean, among the Indonesian fighters. They're talking about they're freedom fighters. They're very proud of themselves, of course. And so why is it that? And I have 3 children, all raised up in Amsterdam, went to school. They never heard about the Indonesian history. I asked them. And yet this political action and percept is really part of the Dutch mind. That's it. I mean, when I come to the 4 points you put it, it would seem that all the points are, taken for granted. I mean, of course, they have to be. But most interesting would be the what kind of perspective the Indonesian perspective are being integrated or incorporated in the research. That's the point.
Yeah.
My point.
Yeah. How? Yeah.
Yeah.
We can talk more later.
Ik wil even duidelijk maken, die kaart, daar staan namen op zoals Westerling, Reebok, Vermeulen, Stufkens. Dat zijn allemaal moordenaars die een lintje hebben gekregen. Ja, hoe noem je dat, ze hebben dus een lintje gekregen wat ze dus gedaan hebben. Dus je kan zien waar ze allemaal geweest zijn. En dan moet je nog zeggen dat het geen oorlogsmisdaad is.
So the map shows some names of Dutch soldiers, killers, and where they have been. And yeah, and he's again asking the question: how can you not say that these are war crimes?
All right, let's talk to Francisca. Yeah. Well, you were one of the initiators behind an open letter to express some of your concerns. Can you maybe name one of your concerns? Is it?
Yeah. Actually, I think the research is anyhow a research that I don't understand what can be enriched with that. Because what is violence? We have in Indonesia had 3.5 centuries of not only physical but also psychological violence. In 1942, when the Japanese occupied us, there were 65 million Indonesians in London. Only 5% could read and write, or write. I don't know why not that kind of violence should be researched, because that kind of violence, this physical and psychological violence, has had an influence on our whole people up to now. And also, I think, on the Dutch people, because they have such a difficulty with receiving refugees, you know. But according to me, the Dutch is treating the refugees as they treated us formerly, a little bit better maybe. In Indonesia, we had no rights at all. The most difficulty that we now have, even after 70 years of independence, we have, the only language we know is the Indonesian language, which could only be developed in 1945. So we have an, what's that? We have a backwardness in development of 3.5 age, and even in the research that they say are also Indonesians involved. But the level of knowledge, the level that we had to knowledge of important things should be met by having 2 times or 3 times Indonesians in the research team, because they need more chances than the Dutch.
So you recommend, so you think that the dominancy in Dutch researchers, that is concerning you, because you think that will influence the outcome? Or you more talk about give Indonesians the chance, because you use the word chance.
I think, why do you want to research violence? Violence is only an, what's that? A consequence of colonialism. I think it's much more important to research what colonialism is doing to people, and then not only to the colonizers, to the colonized, but also to the colonizers. So, if you really want to do genuine research, because I think also researching colonialism will also help the colonizers to become more informed and have more understanding for all the problems that we now have. Violence is no problem at all. Violence is a consequence of colonialism.
Thank you so much. I see it's already 8:30. Maybe you have some questions for one of the panel members. Maybe we can have some questions. Yeah?
Even nog in het dienst van mevrouw. In het begin heb ik zakjes uitgedeeld, hè? Ik weet niet of jullie daar begrijpen wat ik daarmee bedoel. Die zakjes, dat zijn nootmuskaat, kruidnagel en peper. Begin daar nou eens als je dus de geschiedenis wil gaan onderzoeken. Dat is eigenlijk een aansluiting van wat Tante heeft gezegd.
So yeah, to the meaning of all those, never mind, he just shared. The meaning is that, of course, that's where we have, if we research this history, we have to start there. Okay. Are there maybe questions for some of the panel members? Or is it all clear? Yes?
Can I speak for 1 minute?
Yes? Okay. Is it there? What is it?
Good evening, my name is Amir. I'm real Indonesian. I was born in 1949. My father is military, and I have so many history from him. But the basic, I want to give you a little bit basic of the history. Is that possible?
Yes, please.
Maybe camera.
Oh. Good, you can use this one.
The problem starts with because the Dutch government at the time they gave first the Dutch people and the second one the the European.
That's the wet, that is the law.
Yeah.
The Dutch law.
And the third one is the Chinese. No, the fourth one is the dog. The dog, and the five is the ferry law is Indonesian people, or they called before Inlander. Inlander. It's the primitive. This is the basic. This is the beginning.
This is the basis, eh?
The basic of the history. And after that, there is before the old generation, the Indonesian think that the Dutch is like a god because they are very high and also not good. As in 1942 come the Japanese to Indonesia, the Second World War. And between 3 days, the Dutch people of the Dutch government is surrounded with a white flag. That's why at that time, the Indonesian people, they opened their eyes. I mean, before they think the Dutch like a god, but between 3 days, finished. Also, it's not good for the Japanese because in the first time they say we are the oldest brother from Asia. But only the promise, but the reality, it becomes so many things from Indonesia also.
So what do you expect from the new research?
The new research, I want to give the whole story, the real story. Is that only for the young, especially for the young people, because they don't know about what happened before. So for me, I'm the second generation. Because my father was military, I heard so many things from him. That's why I want to give the real story, the real history of Indonesia and the Dutch. But the Dutch government is very lucky because Indonesian people never hate or make what happened has happened.
Apart from Jeffry.
Jeffry said, but it's also good from Jeffrey because you want to make the real story, the real what happened. Because the Dutch always blame somebody. You are wrong, you are still, but never correct himself.
So what can you share about the sentiment?
The sentiment, I mean, the Dutch always give the blame to Germany, Japan, but never say sorry to Indonesia. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
So now we're gonna do. Oh, another question.
I actually want to start about the discussion that we're getting there.
Yeah, we're going to start the discussion now. There's going to be 5 topics: political background and influence, the double role of the NIMH, colonialism as a point of analysis, and Indonesian participation, and the one writer synthesis. So, the first topic, political background and influence. What triggered the government to fund new research? What triggered the three institutions to request funding? Why was the first proposal rejected? Why was it approved in 2016? And to what extent are LIPA's findings new? How have the court cases influenced the Dutch debate? And what topics are still politically sensitive in the Netherlands, apart from the court cases? And finally, what to think about the government dictating the conditions and the topics of the research?
Yeah, these are just some questions. I mean, just to focus that this is one issue, the political influence, and maybe you can share or you can ask those who wrote the first concept letter. It's up to you, but please, if you have a question or have a remark or have maybe a critical point, please.
Yeah. Hi everyone. Good evening. Good afternoon, selamat malam. For this instigation and the discussion we're having right now. Am I clear enough?
Yeah.
Anyways, the point I was trying to make here is that thank you very much, Dr. Yvonne Marx, for the opening remark as well. I think there were some really good insights about post-colonial society here in the Netherlands that we're currently debating, and many more discussions obviously that are going on in our society. Not to tread on any difficult water, but an instance being sort of peak discussion or whatever discussion we might be having in our society today. Also, I want to thank Francisca for bringing up the point of colonialism, and I think the scope that we're discussing right now of this research, of critically looking at colonialism, is something that should be put forward a bit more. Not a bit, but should definitely be a focal point of this, because I think as well the mode of instigation that we want to look at it, so now being a post-colonial society, quote unquote, the similarities of a system where we're discussing with, quote unquote, again, natives, how we're approaching this, where we're giving agency and where we're not giving agency, which I thought was a brilliant point you were making as well, is that what gives us the right now to be in charge of the discourse? Why are we the agency who decides what comes into this research and what not? Why do we decide that our military historians get a say in this, and why particular groups do according to political preference we might have at the current state in the Netherlands? I have my opinions about that as well, but that'd be besides. What I just wanted to say for the project you guys are raising, I get the emotional sentiment. My mother is Indonesian, from a post-colonial Indonesia as well, from West Sumatra. My dad is Dutch. These are questions of my identity that I've been dealing with for a long time, especially the notion of colonialism has been, from my birth, I would say, a big influence on my life, even though I wasn't a part of it directly in that sense. I wrote my thesis about it, currently trying to do another thesis on neocolonialism again. I think if you wish to highlight that, look at the agency. Where are we putting the people that say who are the authority on this research? So why did we pick? Well, not we obviously, but why did Gert Oost-Indie get picked? Whereas you quoted Henk Schulte Noordholt, who I think is a brilliant professor. Why isn't he giving more credit on this? Or people who sorry.
He's in the advisory commission, the academic advisory commission.
Okay.
Yeah, he's not writing the synthesis, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
He's not leading but yeah.
What I understand is that Gert Oost-Indie is primarily a Caribbean expert, and then since recently actually started to delve into Indonesian history. It's the past 10 years, if I look correctly at his archive, I might say. But just this notion of, sorry, I'm threading on for a very long time. It's something very dear to me. But this notion of colonial society that you raised in the first instance, Dr. Mark. Recently we have a new Rieger-Akkoord. We have a new government. We're all happy with that here in the Netherlands. There was a discussion about, there was a again, not my opinion, but the debate. There was a debate within the negotiations as well. The CDA made it a big point that we are now having to face our Dutch identity. Who are we as the Dutch people? That has become a very big point, but moreover then, who are we? It seems that we're putting that away against others. So I think in this research specifically, things like this should come out. The teaching, for instance, in the Golden Age, I was very lucky that I had a teacher. I became very mad during these teachings. I got a different curriculum, but the way we teach our children what the golden age presents, what it is that we want it to be and what it was, there's a discrepancy, and I think the research should take colonialism definitely as a bigger point. Sorry for a long time.
Thank you. It's more on the next point actually this, because it's, your point is more about the post-colonial thinking and analyzing that. Are there any comments about also about the political influence? In what way is that a problem? I mean, is it a problem, or is it already independent enough, and do we need to trust the independent researchers and that it's fine? Or can we say that it is problematic that, for example, VVD requested this and then there are conditions set before it starts? Is there any...
Klaus, Michael. There's one question missing actually, which I want to ask every time. What are we going to do to make our sound mainstream? Because we all know that this is one phony research and that it's quite colonized and not independent at all. So maybe we can add one question at the end about maybe how we, as everybody's here, because there are some prominent people here, gonna make this mainstream, gonna make this this criticism heard to everybody.
Well, this is one attempt, and yeah, we can work on think about it, and I think at least having a discussion here is one step. But yeah, the next step, of course, the idea is that this letter is going to be sent to the government, so that will be something that needs a reply, and yeah. Yeah. Yeah, is there any comment about the political? Because then we will go to the next topic. Yeah?
Yeah, say something? Yeah. What I was just wondering is, so there is a sharp criticism on the design of the project and on the possible influence that there might be from the political side. And I was wondering why the people that were involved in the design of this research project, why they are not part of the discussion about it, and have you thought about inviting them to respond to this criticism?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that is, I think some of them are here actually. The idea of this night was to think about the criticism, and I thought that during the 14th September there was a lot of room and space for them to explain what they're going to do. I think the next step should be, okay, let's have a discussion about it. But I think because it's only 2 hours, we only have 45 minutes left. If you all also, discuss this, it will be very full. So that's the choice of focusing on, raising the questions and not directly, immediately expecting an answer in this room. But of course, they get the email too, so they're welcome here.
Yes, but also, officially, as part of the panel, it would probably could result in a very fruitful discussion if someone of the research was also part of the panel, so that there could be this direct debate on the critical points that are raised. Yeah.
Next. What? Yeah.
There were people here who wanted to say something and would have been happy to say something.
But they were not there. Let's start there. We're not equal yet. We are not at that point yet, I think. First we need to raise the questions and explain the questions, because I think also that what's in this document might be very, might sound harsh, and even maybe people think that it's like a personal attack, which is not, but how to explain that it's not, and why it is not a personal attack. then we don't want people to become defensive because of only that. So let's raise the question first. I don't know, but could be, yeah. Because I think it's very sensitive. I mean, it is not about individual researchers, I think, because we trust every researcher. We are talking about the dominance of the Dutch researchers, and also about how it is set up. That is in the discussion here, not if the individual researcher, how they, I mean, yeah.
I just want to, I guess perhaps not necessarily want to the risk of repeating what people have been saying, but first of all, thank you so much for organizing this and for the people that are in the panel. I'm just wondering, as you also say, the question to what extent is the research by news, and we all know, or perhaps we don't know, but there is always an extensive body of literature on what happened from a critical perspective, and there's much research to be done, but I do think if they spend 4 million to, again, do this research, they should, well, they should not really also, but there should be like the same effort and complete actions and money be available for distributing the knowledge and to popularize it, and I would want to, well, I would like to have more critical voices to be really in support of, towards the government, for example, to make available enough resources to actually have these type of discussions, to actually have this being put in place into education programs, because continuing these type of research in academic spaces, which obviously is great that university level makes it available, but it remains so limited, and I do think there's a responsibility, and the money should not be used again to these users, but rather to the literature that there is already there, to just distribute it in a way that is also accessible to people who don't have access to universities. Sorry, that was more of a comment and a question.
Yeah, yeah. Could everybody follow that? Can you hear it up there too?
I fully agree with in line with what you say.
Can you speak louder?
For me, I was astonished about it is a sheer amount of money, 4.1 million euros. And I came from also from a research organization, but different sector. But yeah, I was wondering, what are they going to do? Do we have any visibility about what they are going to do?
Of course, yeah.
And things like that, and the capacity and resources.
Well, there is a clear. I mean, there is a website, and I think the comments in the document are based on first the website, but of course also the presentation. So yes, there is a clear plan, but it is, for example, there is not one plan or sub-plan that pays solely attention to, well, the issues named here, how our mindset is still influenced, and also how particularly the Dutch landscape is shaped by this history. That it's not really, it's not visible on the website. It's not clear. So yes.
But is there a direct relation to the Ministry of Education, where you then have new school books that the whole research will
Not, it's not this I know, but maybe in the future that maybe they will use some of this.
Yeah, so we wouldn't have that thing again where Jeffry takes his daughter to school.
Yeah.
Another question here?
Well, it was more of a comment. It was actually a direct response to the point previously raised, whether or not we should invite people who are involved with the research. I think an important thing to think about is the question of power, because if we, as people who are critical of this research, invite people from who are participating in that research, I think at least in this stage, it is problematic because those people are already in a position where their voices are heard. And I think what's important here, or what's important that we do today, is that we give a voice to the people who have not been heard, which are the victims of the colonial violence that was the Dutch state participated in at that time. And I mean, I think the research is complete reproduction of colonial attitudes because it propagates this white Dutch semi-intellectual, pseudo-intellectual status quo, and it completely diminishes the voices of the people who were victims of the colonial violence that the Dutch state partook in. So I think what we should focus on are those voices rather than trying to, at least at this stage, have a discussion with the people who already have a voice.
Yeah. Thank you.
I just want to talk differently a bit about this period. It's and I want to raise an issue from the Indonesian historiography. So this period, the 45-50, is in our history textbooks and all the main textbooks in history textbooks is pictured as a glorified period where the Indonesian military won against the Dutch military. So it's something that, because our historiography is very militaristic, so it's controlled and written by the military. So when the idea of this research is in a way going to shatter the image of the Indonesian military in itself, and it can also bring a new insight on the whole perspective of writing Indonesian historiography. So I think for us, I mean, it's not really important whether it's Hurt or Indi or Henk Schulte Nordholt in a way, or whether why Remy Limpach dissertation became the trigger to the whole project. But what is important to us is how this research, as Mas Tosi has brought up, how is it going to be adapted? How are the people is going to react to this? How are the government is going to react to this? How are the military is going to say about the whole chaotic period that they've depicted as a glorified period? So there's a lot of homework for Indonesians from this research. So while we are speaking, this critics can be constructed in a way, but let's just not make the division more, between us and them, between the Dutch and the Indonesian, more exacerbated in a way. So let's. Because one of the concerns is how the Indonesian researchers' role in this project. So, from our perspective, it's more important to see how it's going to be discussed and how it's going to impact the whole historiography on Indonesia.
But I think I really got your point. I think you want to add something to that?
Als ik het goed begrijp, ik kan helaas niet. Hoor bisa bahasa Indonesia ya?
Iya.
Masalahnya, ini bukan sejarah kita. Sejarah
if your perspective is colonial, it doesn't matter your nationality. And how do we know if this research is colonial or not? We know that because we are looking at the concepts they are using. And the concepts they are using are colonial concepts. I'll give you two examples. The concept of extreme violence, which is the basis of this research, is a colonial concept. Because if you talk about extreme violence, you must answer the question, what is normal violence? If you don't talk about normal violence, that means that you take a concept of extreme violence to colonize the concept of violence. And the colonization of the concept of violence is that you don't make the distinction between the violence of oppressor and the violence of liberation. These are two different concepts. And if the research is set up in erasing this distinction, it's a colonial research. And it doesn't matter how many archives you go into, you will get the same research. So, my point of criticism, I respect the initiative and the letter, etc. But my point of criticism is this. If the research is colonial, it's like a chicken. It can't fly high. It can only fly there. And then you ask the chicken, can you be an eagle to fly high? Can you be decolonial? How can you ask the chicken to be an eagle? So that's why to ask the chicken, the colonial researcher to become decolonial is an idiotic idea. And that's why my proposal would be this. There must be, among the 200 million Indonesians, there must be their intellectuals have already done this. You've already done decolonial research. You've already produced narratives, be it written or oral or in songs, etc. And we should try to get the money to get those people in Holland to tell their stories here. That's the decolonial approach to historiography. And you can ask the Dutch government to get them here, but let us first try to learn who these people are who already have done the work which we need to know about.
Thank you.
There was also somebody in the back. Yeah, I know you. Yeah?
No, I was just wondering, Jeffry saying that in the 17th August 1945, Indonesia was already independent. But my question is, what kind of Indonesia it was? Was it like Islam Indonesia, or was it like communist Indonesia?
Pancasila.
All this Pancasila is very militaristic. If you understand it in that sense, but I mean, like all these power struggles is important to do research on. So that's my actually small question.
You speak Indonesian now?
Ya, saya bicara Indonesia.
Ya enggak. Maksud saya itu Indonesia yang kita bicarakan itu buat Belanda itu nggak ada. Kan kita nggak diakui.
But for Indonesia is also not an Indonesian yet.
Sorry?
But for Indonesia back then, it's
Ya.
not Indonesian yet.
Buat kami 17 Agustus memang kita merdeka. Masalahnya Belanda tidak mau mengakui. Kalau Belanda, mereka harus jujur. Maunya apa? Maunya mengakui atau tidak? Sekarang sampai saya bilang sampai 27 Desember 49. Itu orang-orang yang dibunuh, itu siapa?
Ya, saya paham di poin itu, dan saya sepakat bahwa yang dibunuh itu orang biasa. Tapi kan masalahnya Indonesia itu menjadi seperti apa? Itu kan pertarungan elit ya, antara elit Indonesia dengan elit Belanda.
Tidak diakui, Pak.
Iya.
So the question is about okay, 17 August, Indonesia declared independence, but then where do we talk about? What kind of Indonesia? There is a...
Veel opmerken is dat de brief en dat geschreven hebben voor de 14, dat we daar uit over krijgen over de zorg van de vader en dergelijke. En een vraag aan Jeffry en uit als er nu nog zou worden uitgenodigd voor het onderzoeksteam en of er kan wordt, zou je dan daar instappen?
So, okay, two questions in English. First, why was the letter already written before the presentation, the kick-off event? And secondly, would you, if they ask you now, would you participate? And would you support it?
Was dat voor de 14e? Ja, dat was voor de 14e, ja, dat klopt.
But why? Why did you write it before? How could you know what's inside the project?
Ja, ik woon hier bijna 50 jaar. Ik weet hoe de Nederlanders in elkaar zitten.
But I think it was the letter, if I'm not mistaken, from February, from NIOS directed to the government that make you, I mean, I remember that.
Kijk, nu alleen een 9-stappenplan uitgelegd. En voordat die 9-stappenplan waren uitgelegd, had u al bepaalde zorgen.
Oh ja. Dat is al voorbekoud. Kijk, dat is al voorbekoud. Oshini die heeft een boek geschreven. Hij wist dat Lipak met zijn boek uitkwam. En hij ging even gauw zelf een boek laten onderzoeken, dan gaat hij schrijven. Weet je wel, hij laat iemand onderzoeken, dan gaat hij schrijven. Maar het smerige is, hij gaat met het boek naar Indonesië, gaat hij daar verkopen. Via de ruggen van die mensen waar wij voor opkomen. Want hij gaat alleen maar over die zielige militairen, die veteranen. Ja? Dat is allemaal aan voorbekant. En ik heb geen vertrouwen aan het boek. Aan deze mensen heb ik totaal geen vertrouwen. En helemaal.
Maatschappelijk plan wordt zitten.
Nou ja, het hangt er vanaf natuurlijk hoe ze ons, zeg maar, daar willen inzetten, tot hoe ver ze dat willen.
Hoe zouden ze dat willen dan?
Nou, in ieder geval, de 17 augustus. Eerst, waar heb je het over? Waar heb je het over? Heb je het over Nederlands-Indië of heb je het over Indonesië? Dat moet eerst duidelijk zijn. Waar heb je het over? Want je kan niet zeggen dat het Indonesië is terwijl je het niet erkent.
Ja, oké. Weer.
Ja, ik ben maar gewoon een cementarbeider hoor. Dan hoef je helemaal niet intellectueel te zijn hoor.
So there is, sorry, the point was, I think your question was why did you already have your concerns, and then Jeffrey explained that he read, or he know about the book that Oost-Indie wrote after, I think after the book of Limbach, or before the book of Limbach, and then he said that he thinks that, Oost-Indie wrote this book, but did not do the research himself, and let other do the research. But then after that, he went to Indonesia to present the book to Indonesia, but talk about the Dutch veterans, like if you have to feel sorry for the Dutch veterans, something like that. It upsets him.
There's another question there.
I think first of all, the Dutch government must be accept that Indonesian 17th August 1945 is independence. It's also through the UN, except the UN. Only the notice from the Dutch government. And between from 17th August 45 till 1950, Indonesia is a country. That means the Dutch government at the time attacked the country. Because the 17th August of 1945, through the UN itself, Indonesian independence, but not from the Dutch.
Laat ik misschien helder zijn. Ik weet waarom de Nederlanders dat niet willen doen, omdat de Nederlanders dat moeten betalen. Daar gaat het om. Je moet de schadevergoeding betalen als ze dus onze onafhankelijkheid erkennen.
He knows why the Dutch people don't want to do it, because they know they have to pay money, they have to do the...
En plus nog, die 4,5 miljard, Indonesië betaalt schadevergoeding aan Nederland 4,5 miljard gulden.
Including the 4.5 billion.
En dat moeten ze ook terugbetalen.
That Indonesia have to pay to become independent, because they would have to pay that back.
And they never say sorry, never say apologize.
But they said sorry in 2005. you don't...
If you read from the true story, from the Dutch government, they say the Indonesian military is a terrorist. But from Indonesia, we protect or they deserve our country. And that's a two different story.
Two different stories.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Now I just want to make sure if I get it clear. So, from whom is this letter going to be sent? I think because then there's, like, even among Indonesians, we have different kind of perspective. I understand perfectly what Jeffrey meant, and I also understand what Grace meant, because at the moment, the way we Indonesians see how we want to uncover from our history, it's not just that part of violence, as what to say. There are a lot of things that we want. We want clarity, we want honesty from the government, and I do understand that the way we young Indonesians see how we want our history to be narrated might be different than those that from Jeffrey's generation. So I could understand that, and I just want to make clear from whom is this letter going to be sent and to whom, so I can get a better picture. Because I think, as you said before, that there are not many Indonesians know if anything about.
Ook geen Nederlanders weten het, toch? Het is niet
Ja.
alleen Indonesisch, maar de Nederlanders weten het ook
Ya,
niet.
ya. Saya mengerti saya mengerti bahwa yang Bapak maksud adalah sejarah Indonesia, sejarah Belanda yang dipermasalahkan dalam masalah ini. Tapi bagi saya, Bapak juga perlu mempertimbangkan apa yang dibilang bahwa penelitian ini perspektif itu bahwa sekarang banyak juga Pak orang Indonesia muda yang punya perspektif bahwa penelitian seperti ini bisa membawa negara kita kepada kejujuran gitu. Itu yang mungkin kita berbeda di situ.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but there's a lot of other people with questions. I see a couple of
I
hands,
just
so
want to know
if you don't
from
mind,
whom
I'll
is this
go
letter.
on.
You had a question, and the answer is that there will be a list as many as people as we can find to sign it from
So
those
it's going
people.
to from personal.
Yeah, so it's not one organization or it's not one few people, but as many as think, I agree with this concerns. Okay, it will be to the government, and maybe I want to add a little bit because I think what is confusing already, and that's what I think also concerned me, and that's what I meant in the beginning, is when you talk about Indonesian perspective on this history and what the issues with Indonesian historiography is so different from the Dutch issues that sometimes I feel that I have that so many times that I have the feeling that I'm fighting for something, and I mean I'm fighting for the Netherlands in that way because I want the Netherlands to learn something of
Yeah,
it.
I get what you
But
mean.
that is so different if for you, for example, or for so therefore I suggest let's do it step by step. Yes, the Netherlands and Indonesia have different wishes, I think, in this.
Okay, so I have another technical question. Like, I'm really interested to what you said about having a shared history or like a shared narration of our history. I do know that there's a stichting in the Netherlands. It's a stichting Nederlands-Japans Indonesia, and they arrange this annual event in which people could really share their perspective of history. I'm just wondering if you've ever heard of them. I didn't include them in the project.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like 6 people raising hands. I would like to start with people who I haven't heard yet, and like to start with this.
Two questions. I must say I'm a bit confused with what I can take away from the session. So there are 2 questions. One is that we started out with nice statements of the way in which the Dutch ignored or suppressed parts of their history, which some good examples were made of how that affects personal lives of people and the need for the Dutch to confront their history. From that perspective, I thought the conclusion would be how wonderful that this research is finally happening, and how great that KITLV and these other institutions fought against certain forces that didn't want the research to have happened. Because, let's face it, the research is about 65 years too late. It should have happened way before. That we have an officially sanctioned study of the violence during 45-50. So I think we all share, given that we're concerned about the way the Dutch deal with, is dealing with its colonial past, we all share that it's a great thing that there's now official sanctioning and money to do research on this period. Given that we share this, that's a good thing, the question is why the animosity? Why is this us-them kind of thing? Why is KITLV not invited? And why is there not a spirit of how wonderful is this happening? How can we share our concerns to make the research better or more effective?
Well, because
the question is for KITLV, sir, not for us.
I would also say that researching 5 years of history isn't researching 350 plus years of colonialism. So, yeah, but I think there's somebody raising their hand.
Well, I'm more interested in a follow-up of the result of the research. I thought actually, there is a finding on violence during that period, right? So I I want to ask the panelists, so what do you think that the Dutch government will do on the result of the finding itself? Or at least what are your expectations on what the Dutch government should do on the result of the research?
Bisa apa namanya sekali lagi dalam bahasa Indonesia barangkali ya?
Iya Pak, jadi kan nanti kan riset itu ada hasilnya Pak.
Ya.
Nanti harapan Bapak itu apa terhadap hasil riset itu?
Saya nggak ada harapan.
Enggak, paling tidak itu harapan pemerintah Belanda, apa yang dilakukan pemerintah Belanda terhadap hasil riset itu, apakah mengeluarkan statement atau membuat tindakan yang lain gitu Pak?
Selama Belanda tidak mau mengakui dan juga jujur meneliti sejarah ini, saya tidak anggap itu sejarah. Apa yang mereka teliti, saya tidak bisa anggap. Karena mereka mau membicarakan yang membunuh di situ orang-orang Indonesia. Di samping itu dia tidak mengakui kita punya kemerdekaan.
Yes, thank you for your opinion.
I'm sorry, there's so much confusing maybe because of our different languages, but maybe you want to add something?
Yes.
Look,
like it or not, the Indonesian government, state, would demand the Dutch. Sorry to say that.
That's okay.
Would demand the Dutch to recognize August 1745 as independent. For sure, it has been about 50 years. Well, that's the point. It would influence the perception. I'm interested in Indonesian perspective. The point here is if you talk about the whole Indonesian colonization, the colonization of Indonesia, you must have at least two perspectives. For the Indonesian perspective first. So if you are talking about the acknowledgement of the Indonesian of the independence, I'm sorry to say it will happen. No, that I don't like that, but that's the point. Like Rosian Anwar said that keparat dengan itu apa itu tidak. The point is we are independent on August 1745. We don't care what the Dutch said. That's the whole thing.
Yeah, well, aside from the recognition of the independence, the issue of recognition of independence, whether 17 or whatever. But I mean,
well,
on the finding of the violence, do you have any expectation on what the Dutch government should do on that? Aside of the issue of the independence date.
Yes.
I think we are all misled by this research, because this research is only how do you call it? A scapegoat for not recognizing what has happened during the colonization of 3.5 centuries. I mean, if that is being researched, then we know why violence has happened. If we think about what has the Dutch won during the 3.5 century of exploiting our richness, also resources, and so on, and leaving the people in very bad, poor living standards. So if something would be researched, it is what has been done with all the richness that has come all these ages from our country. We have paid in 1949 $4.5 milliard guildens. So actually, we have already paid for the so-called Bersia question. Is that it? If we don't? But if we really research what colonialism has done, then I think it will not be nice for the Dutch government to realize what that means. I think this research is a kind of scapegoat to wash their hands in.
There.
Maybe, okay, thank you. Maybe I can give two comments. One is, I'm Dirk Staat, I work at the National Military Museum in Soesterberg. The first one is, I sense a deep mistrust, even animosity it's called. It might be wise to listen to Santoso, who said maybe we should look what the results are going to be. And there's even talk about the follow-up of the results, and the research is not even yet started. I'm not part of the research group, by the way. The second one is, I think, and people might be missing this, and this might also interest Mr. Mark, that I sense a paradigm shift in the Netherlands. There is a certain paradigm shift ever since the Book of Limpach, and of course there's all kinds of nuances to that, but I was able to produce, together with Nicole Imler, she's sitting there, of the NIOD, an exhibition on the widows of Rawagede, paid for by the Ministry of Defense. My salary is paid for by the Ministry of Defense because the National Military Museum, although an independent foundation, is financed for 85% by the Ministry of Defense. And it was opened by Professor Zegveld, and Jeffry was there. So I think there are 1,000 points of light in this whole question, and this might be a point to take with us entering this research period.
Michael, sorry?
Yeah, actually I have a personal question for Marjolein because she got me kind of triggered. There was this conversation about the apology that the Dutch gave, and you responded that they did that in 2005. Did you mean that sarcastically, or did you mean it as an actual argument? Because
sorry, what was your question?
You said actually the Dutch apologized in 2005.
Yeah, I said it because it was, I think, Amelia said that indeed, but they never said sorry. But of course, in 2005 there was Bankbot who said sorry.
But that wasn't an apology. That was an insult.
That's the difference. There is a difference in apology legally and sorry. I'm so sorry. So, but what is your question then?
No, I wanted to ask if you. I hope you said that was sarcastically, because saying, okay, we acknowledge the 17th of August, but only de facto, that's really not saying sorry. That is just spitting people in the face once more. So I was hoping that you meant that sarcastically, because you really...
Yes, and I was sarcastic, but I was also curious how that, if there is more response on that. I want to say, I think that I want to comment a little bit on the animosity part, because like if this is about two camps or creating two camps, I think this is not about creating two camps. This is the second evening to give a platform to people that have not been heard so far, and also to start thinking about this. I mean, this is confusing, yes. Maybe we are going away, like what was this? Maybe. But let's think about this and let's keep talking about it. That's all I... Yeah,
Mag ik even aan Dirk... Ik wil graag Dirk even reageren. Dirk, hoe zie je nou een onderzoek waar de onderzoekers Nederlanders zijn, die objectief zijn en notabene de NEMA in de rechtszaal tegen ons. Ja, hoe geloofwaardig is dat?
Yeah, okay. I understand it might be problematic.
Maybe you can repeat the question.
So the question is, how can government historians be any kind of objective in this research? I think that this might be problematic, but at the same time, Remy Limpach was also part of this. And of course, as I told you, there are numerous difficulties, but I think there's a paradigm shift within government, within historiography, and it has something to do with theory, but not all of it.
But maybe also because of the political reality of the court cases that they cannot ignore it anymore.
No, of course, they can be stopped. And so I also consider Jeff a hero in that respect, of course. But there was room for this exhibition, and it was a moving and a true exhibition. I think it's not whitewashing myself. I'm quite white myself, but I think there is a change coming. I'm like Bob Dylan.
Yeah, why was the change not that far that he could be part of the kickoff on Fort Pagee? Because you say there is a change, but why was he not there? It means.
No, I'm not a party in this, of course. I think he should have been there. It might have been a mistake not to invite him. I think so. I think it was. I'm not part of that. I'm sorry for that. Yeah. But I see no problem in having qualified military historians working on this project. Why not?
Because
Why not?
I pointed out here, because that is the question, of course, but why there is still a political reality going on right now, because there are still claims waiting for a reply.
Yes.
And
I don't think they will lessen. I don't think they will lessen as a result of this research. I think there will be more and more. I think the government will. I think they might come to another decision, a kind of a collective thing for all this, because this will not go away, and that is what Jeff has done.
I also want to put a question to the research committee. How do they think about the violence that was committed in the Aceh War? How do they think about the violence that committed in the Bali massacre, in the Lombok massacre? What is that to be compared to why is now the research on this violence so important? Why has the violence that has been committed also during the Dutch Indies period, is that not as important to be researched?
In other words, too much focus on the Siap.
Maar, misschien, ik weet niet of mijn punt is namelijk dit. Als je het hebt over Siap, prima. Laten we dat onderzoeken. Maar benoem dat wie die mensen zijn. Wie zijn die mensen? Zijn het Indonesiërs? Wij zijn niet erkend. Dus, ga nou eens even onderzoeken waar je moet beginnen. Erken dat eerst dat.
I have to admit, I long did not understand why you said it, because you always say it.
Kijk, ik zie dit uit de Nederlandse bril. Voor mij is het als paal boven water dat wij 17 augustus 1945 onafhankelijkheid. En dat Nederland ons de soevereine staat kan aanvallen, dat is het oorlogsmisdaad. Dat is voor mij. Maar voor de Nederlanders, die zeggen dat het Indonesisch bij. Ze willen ons niet erkennen. En dan heb je het over Nederlands-Indische mensen. Dat zijn ze. Meneer Sahi is een Nederlands-Indische mens. Meneer Jasman, die net overleden is volgens de Nederlandse wet, is hij gewoon een Nederlands-Indische man. Snap Oost-Indië dat niet, of hoe zie je dat nou? Ik begrijp het niet hoor. Zo moeilijk is het niet.
We are wrapping up, but I think maybe the last point, what I discovered that you really mean with this, because you repeat it a lot, who are those people? Or why, it's about the recognition of 17, why does that matter? Yes, it matters, especially I think for when you're writing history, because you will have to say at one point, where are you talking about, right? If you talk about Indonesia exists from 45 onwards, then it will also affect what you think what it was. Was it, I mean, yes, we are calling it a colonial war now, but, so I think for the that is, I think, the concern, how to deal with it, how to deal with it.
Als ze dat niet willen, dan gaan ze gewoon, dan doen ze aan racisme, punt. Zo simpel is dat.
It's about time to stop. I would like to name a person that I haven't heard before, the historiography classes.
So I I'm just a new person here. I'm from the United States, so it's all very interesting to me. But I'm curious about, I study Indonesia, and I find it interesting, all this debate about it. The Dutch government is funding a project, the title of which says Indonesia, 1945 to 1950. So why is it such a point of debate about the Dutch government not recognizing it?
Because they don't officially recognize it. It is only, what is it, de facto and not...
But it's in the title.
Yeah, that's exactly
En
what it means.
dat is toch geschiedvervalsing? Dat is toch geschiedvervalsing? Ja, dat is toch geschiedvervalsing? Dat is zo.
So, we have about 1 minute left. I think I haven't heard this with the classes as well.
Here's something about the concept of the future of this method. I mean, everybody's waiting for, can be mobilized, can be...
Yeah. Okay, my activists. Actually, I prepared much more constructive, like, I wanted to discuss the content of the research, but we just more vaguely discussing it now, and it's fine. But if you say this is something that also are my concerns, or please, you can leave your name or your email or both, and then we will definitely keep you up to date about what will be done with the inputs of tonight and how we can continue this.